All right, so welcome once more to this webinar on the very important topic of mission-oriented innovation policy. This webinar is organized by the RESIST project, an Interreg Baltic Sea region project funded by the European Union. And before we go into the actual topic of mission-oriented innovation policy, I would like to ask you, Sabine. You are the lead partner of the RESIST project, and you represent the Ministry of Economics and Innovation of the Free and Hanseatic City of Hamburg, who's the lead partner of the RESIST project. And I would like to ask you to briefly introduce the project to our audience today so that they know where we are coming from and why we are having this webinar today. The floor is yours, Sabine.
Thank you very much, Hauke, for the introduction. Very pleased to see you all here. In the RESIST project, RESIST stands for Regional Ecosystems for Social Innovation and Social Transformation. And we are 13 partners in the Baltic Sea region, as you can see here on the map. So we are a 3-year project and are roughly halfway through the project lifetime. We have partners from very different backgrounds, from authorities, from universities, also innovation centers. And we we in Hamburg Ministry of Economy and Innovation, we are the lead partner in RESIST. I would like to just briefly talk about what we are exactly doing and which challenges we are tackling in RESIST. So the first challenge is that there is a lack of development of ecosystems for social innovation and social entrepreneurship in the Baltic Sea region. So we want to tackle this, and with CSEI model for the region. So CSEI stands for Cluster for Social and Ecological Innovation. And we have 2 parts for this solution. One is that we have prepared a prototypical setup for such a CSEI. And the second one, and this is where our webinar today is jumping in, is that we have designed a mission design guide. So we are working with the MOIP topic in RESIST, and we have designed this, and now it is tested in our regions. And after the testing, we will revise it, and then I think we will also have a webinar to present our MOIP guide. So therefore, the topic today is very important for us, for the project. And and we have a second challenge we are tackling, which is we think that social innovation is not very good represented in the innovation support sector, not very good integrated. So we have a capacity building program for, so to say, traditional innovation support actors. We have developed a guide on how to make innovation social. And we have trained the trainer courses. Both are tested in our region. Yeah, and one more thing what we are working on is a framework for impact measurement, which is very important. We are working on that at the moment. And one thing which is like beyond all those solutions or challenges is that we organize strategy labs. That means we are organizing in the regions and also transnationally labs to anchor the topic of social innovation in the regional innovation strategies, but maybe also in other strategies. So this is like a topic beyond this. So this is what we are working on. We have some transfer activities, so we facilitate cooperation among these CSEIs, these clusters in the Baltic Sea region. We also provide capacity building for innovation support actors outside of the partnership. And we support knowledge transfer with the European and national innovation competence centers. So that was just a short introduction to RESIST, and I stop my screen. Give back to you, Hauke.
Thank you very much, Sabine. So you have explained why we are doing this webinar, because our project partners in the RESIST project many of which are regional authorities or NGOs, other institutions working at the local and regional level, are on the verge of trying out a mission-oriented approach in relation to the cluster approach in their regions. And so we thought it was a very good time to also get some expert knowledge and insight on the topic of mission-oriented innovation policy to help our partners, but also to help others who are working with this outside, of course, of our project consortium. And we are very pleased, as I said, to have our two speakers here today. The first one that I would like to hand the floor to is Charles McIver from the OECD. You are a policy analyst at OECD's Directorate for Science, Technology and Innovation, and you are also part of the OECD's Mission Action Lab, as I understand. And what you're doing is you're trying to bring together research and evidence with policymaking. So you and your colleagues at OECD provide advice and tools also to policymakers, including MOIP toolkit. Please tell us a little bit about your work. What is mission-oriented innovation policy in a nutshell? And how should it be applied? And what have you already learned in your work with and on missions? Please, the floor is yours now.
Great. So thank you very much for having me today. I've been asked to present this toolkit that we have that brings together a lot of the evidence on mission-oriented innovation policy. So this is the, can you see my screen? I hope I'm sharing my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. When we talk about mission-oriented innovation policies, these are policies that set an ambitious goal that is more than just the business as usual, that has a defined time frame, and usually they span both technology and sectoral fields to bring together a number of different solutions to tackle the big goal. And so we do all sorts of evidence gathering and put all the cases that we gather from our reports onto this toolkit, which is a searchable database. When we're talking about mission-oriented innovation policies, there's kind of three main areas that we look at. One is the strategic orientation. And so this is, how do governments design their missions, as well as how do they engage with the innovation system, the process in developing these missions. Once these missions are set, how do they coordinate both across government, so between departments or within departments, or from one level of government? So if maybe you're a federal government with subnational municipal bodies, and then how do you implement these policies, and what are the tools that governments use, whether that's funding or regulatory changes or procurement, and then how do they monitor and evaluate these types of policies? We then have identified 9 areas that we think are important within those 3 buckets that missions are supposed to provide added value on. So they're supposed to provide more directionality in policies. They're supposed to coordinate across different policy fields. They're supposed to have a diverse and consistent set of different interventions. And so then these are the areas that we look at on this toolkit. So when you go, so this would be the main landing page that you would end up at, and you can look at either what are the types of initiatives or the countries that you're interested in. So you could go through this first policy initiatives window. You can look at the missions themselves, and you can look at within an initiative, maybe there's 5 or 20 individual missions, or you can look at those individual dimensions. So if you're interested in, and I think this is what I've been asked to talk to more today, is this idea of strategic orientation and how do you develop missions. You could look at, how do other countries engage, or how do they set these orientations? And so then you could click on one of these, you could click on the engagement, and then you can see that then you get a snapshot from every country that we have on this portal. So there's maybe 35 individual cases that you could look at. And so we have a number of different cases from around the world, and they all have their own approaches for this, for taking a mission-oriented approach. One of the key principles is that when you're looking to develop a mission-oriented approach, you should start early on thinking about who will be needed in the implementation stage, so that you can crowd in their interest and get them involved in shaping the mission, because that then builds buy-in for later in the process. And so many different governments take different approaches to this. They use, I think, maybe more traditional approaches sometimes with workshops or roundtables, or forums or online platforms where citizens and experts and businesses can submit ideas for mission-oriented ideas. And then some of them use maybe more novel approaches. And so one of the cases that I'm going to highlight today is this a case from Catalonia, and they have this this policy that that they call the IS3 CAT, and you can look at all the information on here. You can see if you wanted a snapshot, you can get this, and then you can look at the strategic orientation, and you can look at how do they build legitimacy, how do they design their missions, and these sorts of things for each of the cases on here. And so Catalonia does a number of different more like design thinking workshops to develop what they call a theory of change. And this is something that we consider an important best practice for missions. Lots of countries design their mission and they think, okay, that's all we need. Now we're off to the races. But just setting a statement that sets out an objective, it doesn't do enough to help stakeholders understand how we're going to get there, how we're going to realize this. And so there's this idea that's it's called a theory of change, and we have a number of papers that I can share with you afterwards that talk about how to do this. But these theories break down the mission objective into more tangible sub-goals. They look at who is responsible for those goals, what are the levers of change, and then what activities are they going to perform that they expect will then make progress towards this mission. And so the Catalonian approach is very inclusive in this regard, and they have all these these shared visions, they call them, with sub-regions within Catalonia, and they help identify societal challenges that are important to those sub-regions, and then how are they going to address those. Another subnational case that we have on the portal is from Flanders in Belgium. We also have a case on Wallonia, if that's of interest to you. And they evolved over time to take a mission-oriented approach. They didn't decide, okay, we're going to start with missions and the circular economy today. It was something that they initially did some work on the circular economy, supporting R&D, and then they realized that maybe this was a more systemic problem that required more joined-up solutions from across government. And so then they slowly adopted the mission-oriented approach over about 15 years. And now are real leaders in this space, and not just within Belgium, but they also do all sorts of work at the European Commission level, and really helping to advance their agenda around Europe. Two other cases that I'll just talk to quickly that I think are interesting in terms of how do you design missions are this one case from Korea, where they have this comprehensive plan to solve social problems based on science and technology. And they have 43 big problems that they're looking to address. And 5 of them they've decided, okay, we're going to take a mission-oriented approach to address. This is the 3rd comprehensive plan. And after each iteration, they became more mission-oriented. But going from the 2nd to the 3rd plan was definitely a big step. And they didn't just use roundtables and normal expert consultations, but they did big data analytics. They looked at citizen sentiment in the news. They really took, they used foresight and SWOT analysis of what is Korea good at? What could Korea use science and technology and become a leader in that space, but also address key problems that really matter to citizens. And so I think that's a really interesting approach in terms of how they've designed their missions. And then the last one is this more ecosystem-based approach coming from Denmark. And so Denmark has these programs that they call the Inno missions. And these are more consortia-led approaches where the government has delegated authority to run these programs to a consortia of private sector and higher education actors. To set these missions, the government did more of a top-down approach to decide, okay, these are the broad areas that we think are important for Denmark. And then they had a competitive process where they selected 4 consortia's roadmaps for how they would address these societal challenges. They have now delegated authority for even making the funding decisions out of the government and into these consortia in a way that is a lot more bottom up. So these are 4 cases that I wanted to highlight, but we have 35 on this platform. We at the OECD work with countries around the world, providing in-depth consultations so we've just released a study on Korea, but we've done the same for Japan and Norway and Austria, where we look at how are their missions rooted in their broader science and technology system, and then provide advice on how they can improve, as well as more targeted action-oriented research around specific issues. So right now we're working with Sweden on developing this theory of change and how do they make their missions more actionable. We do this in my directorate at the OECD for science, technology, innovation, but also in collaboration with other groups across the OECD through this organization that we call the Mission Action Lab. And so we work with the Governance Directorate and the Development Corporation on mission-oriented work, because it's not just the science and technology expertise that's important for these. But that's the end of my presentation, and I look forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Charles. That was actually a presentation that was well under the time limit. That gives us more time for questions. That is really great. I have a quick follow-up question. If our partners or participants in the webinar today would like to find more information, what would be the entry point? You've shown the toolkit, but there's also more information on the OECD websites. What would you recommend? And can they also get in touch with you or with other practitioners? Is there a way of exchanging with others on the topic of mission-oriented innovation policy that you offer?
Yes. We have our website here, which has a number of papers that you might find useful that go more in depth. In the last few months, we've released one on governance, one on monitoring and evaluation, one on portfolio management, and which is this idea of how do you bring together these diverse projects and towards a more common goal. One on net zero emissions and the unique challenges that net zero emissions face, based on interviews with 100 cases from around the world. And then this in-depth study that we've just completed on Korea. So this you can all find on the website that I've just put in the chat. We also have this community of practice where about once a month or so we have events, and so I've put a link where you can register for that in the chat as well. We'll have one where we'll present some of this work on the governance, portfolio management, and monitoring evaluation at the end of April, so you're welcome to join that. And then, yeah, if you're interested in working with us at the OECD, then you can definitely reach out to me, and we'd be happy to have those conversations as well. So I've put my email in the chat as well. So if that's helpful.
Okay, thank you very much also for posting the links and the email in the chat. Very helpful. All right, so thank you for this first presentation. I think we will go straight on to the second presentation from Alberto, and then you can ask your questions to either speaker afterwards. So please kindly welcome Alberto Giacometti, who is a research fellow at Nordregio, that is Nordic and European Research Center for Regional Development and Planning, established by the Nordic Council of Ministers. You are specialized in regional development, governance, and planning processes, and you are one of the authors of two very recent publications focusing on mission-oriented innovation policy in the Nordic countries, a policy brief and a report that have been published in 2024 and 2025. So it's a very fresh insights that you are presenting here with a focus on the Nordic countries. And please share these with us, Alberto. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Hauke, for the invitation, and we'll just share my screen. Let's see if you can see. Basically, what I'll be presenting here is a little bit of a step back. We wanted to look at what's going on in the Nordic countries, and more specifically, we wanted to know how innovation policy has changed, or if it has changed at all, and how can this be coordinated across different levels. So we asked these simple questions: have missions at all been introduced in Nordic countries and regions? What characterizes them in the specific contexts, and how are they vertically coordinated? As Hauke already mentioned, there is a first publication where we cover the first step. So we work on the concept, what are the rationales for innovation policy changes, and then with co-authors, professors in Sweden, Finland, and Denmark, we covered the three countries' innovation policy more broadly. So we analyzed their frameworks and how they have perhaps changed over time. A second phase was at a subnational level, so we looked at empirically in three different regions: Northern Jutland, Ostrobothnia, and Västerbotten, so within the same countries, for which we wrote an academic article that is under review at the moment, but also led to the policy brief that Hauke mentioned. These links are here, and I will be sharing this, so you will be able to find more. So just a quick step back, it's just important to say that missions are not new. The concept was already there since the 80s by Ergas as conceptualized as big science for big problems. But today, revisited concept or idea is focusing more on addressing broader and more complex societal problems. So it takes a more comprehensive approach. And the more dominant perspective led by Matsukato, among other academics, the key point is that, well, we need to set directionality on innovation efforts towards societal goals, and this should be rather ambitious. We should have clear measures and a clear time frame. Yet, I think this is perhaps easier said than done. So this is what we wanted to look also at the academic debate around it. And one of the things that have been highlighted is that although there is sufficient justification or focus on the rationale for why do we need transformative innovation, there is perhaps much less understanding of what does it take for public authorities to both instigate change, but also to conduct system-level transformations. Other critiques are that missions are targeting so-called wicked problems, so they entail high levels of uncertainty, complexity, contestation. And so if that's the case, then how do we find clear measures of performance to monitor performance? This is also leads to another issue of legitimacy. how can we pick, or it's hard to pick directions when there is high divergence on both on the problem side, but also on the solution sides, how they are defined. And so should it be an authority with a mandate to decide, or should it be more who has the best available knowledge, or who knows? Other critics have focused on approach being rather top-down or place-blind or context-blind. And in this case, since we're interested in vertical coordination, there is also a question whether subnational authorities even have the mandate or the instruments to even design or conduct local missions. So what's next? How do we move forward? Of course, Matsukato, the lead promoter of this concept, has written a number of books such as The Entrepreneurial State and Mission Economy that have a big emphasis on public value and building internal capacities within public sector as a means to have the ability to drive such large, ambitious processes. Others have also focused on the importance of building capacities in public sector, which is a clear contrast to so-called neoliberal policies. Other authors have focused more generally on change agency, multiple forms, so not just authority, but how many different forms of actors can be drivers of change. And also, I think this is important now that we look more, when we go into the nitty-gritty issues, Janssen and others, they refer to missions not in the Matsukato approach, thinking very targeted, very clear, but rather more as visions, missions as visions, where we have a shared understanding amongst an heterogeneous group of people. Also, others provide ideas for how to do more place-based approaches and so on. So, of course, we are talking about multi-level implementation, which is quite challenging. What is relevant, just to mention very quickly at the supranational level, already in line with the Paris Agreement, there was a commitment to create global missions or mission innovation. And later there was a new version 2.0, so to say, where 23 countries and the European Commission focus specifically or committed to put research, development and innovation efforts to specific areas like hydrogen. And what is important for us within EU, the EU is really a big promoter of this process. There is 100 billion euros devoted to 5 missions. But not only, also this mission approach is to be found in more broader policy frameworks, in the Green Deal, in the recovery funds, but within innovation, more specifically in the new European innovation agenda. So we looked at national level, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark. What is important to say maybe in the case of Sweden is that challenge-based approaches and transformative innovation policy is not something that just happened out of the blue. We can say that this kicked off already with the Lund Declaration when Sweden had the EU presidency in 2009. And since then, several programs have been laid out, challenge-driven innovation, strategic innovation programs, and so on. And the most recent one is impact innovation, where you can see the structure here in this figure, where the mission approach and the development of missions have been more explicitly defined. So here is the structure of how this should be a participative process with several actors and ecosystem, and there should be a mission program office and so on. And as we can see here, it's very much interpreted in the Matsukato approach, with missions should be bold, ambitious, time-bound, and measurable. In Sweden, there is a rather complex innovation system or support distributed amongst funding comes from various different agencies that have a high degree of autonomy, which is perceived by many that this is a positive thing, as it allows them to be more strategic and be more participative in their processes. although perhaps a downside, if you wish, is that there is perhaps less ownership of, in this case, the missions at the top government level. But here, the innovation policy at the program level, at least, we can say that there's a clear emphasis on challenge-based innovation and system changes. So not just competitiveness, as it used to be mostly dominated approach before, and that. But also that missions it constitutes a natural evolution of previous transformative approaches. It's not new, as I was saying before. You can see the time-bound process, and also we can identify, at least so far, that several of these programs, including the input innovation approach, is dominated by, so to say, quite strong actors that have been well established already for a while. So maybe in some programs and some projects there is more inclusion of new actors, whereas in others maybe there is less. And this policy is generally aspatial, so favors areas with strong actors, although display sensitivity is slowly coming to be. So on a general sense, it's you could say that there is a degree of fragmentation and mixed results on the ground. This is to be seen. This is very preliminary, because missions are only starting, so to say. In the case of Finland, it's also important to note that directionality is not new. It's been challenge orientation has been persistent already since the 80s, but there is no distinctive or well-structured mission-oriented approach. What here Sotarauta, professor in Tampere, describes is more that missions and challenge approaches are embedded within the programs, within policy programs. This is considered also to be a more of a pragmatic approach from Finland. But missions have been seen more for the potential of mobilizing stakeholders towards shared objectives. But it's there's a rather confusing or fuzzy policy cloud, where there is an explicit desire to move from economic growth to more challenge orientation, but without losing sight of economy. So there's, to some extent, some kind of contradictory policy discourse, where there's an intention of moving away from this more institutional innovation system to a more entrepreneurial one, which conflicts to this call in mission approaches to have a more strategic and strong role of the state. Again, here from the outset, it's a very top-down approach. But when you look at how innovation policy rolls out in practice, it's actually much more stakeholder-driven. Again, here is rather aspatial, but there is quite a high degree for flexibility, for interpretation and localization in regions and municipalities. In Denmark, it's also considered to be a rather fragmented innovation system with many different programs. However, up at least until 2020, the approach from the Ministry of Higher Education and Science would be rather broad, not speaking directionality really. It would be more about finding excellent research. But it, so to say, coexisted with other funding tools that had a more narrowly defined research and innovation activities. But then in 2020, as already Charles mentioned, Denmark defined very concrete missions, which are at the top level. So in this case, we can say that Denmark is the only one of the three countries I'm presenting that has missions that are laid out at the top national level. And if we look more carefully, we can actually identify that two of these are very clearly challenge-driven. So the Matsukato approach, and the other two are actually more solution-driven. So they are picking already what is the solution or what is the technology. There is little coordination with other funding instruments in Denmark. So the missions, despite is a very top-down, but they have not actually permeated through the entire research and innovation policy efforts as a whole. Here, Thijs Hansen, professor in Copenhagen, refers to there's a risk of becoming a grant awarding island in a larger research and innovation funding ocean. Again, it generally plays less as an approach, but as Charles also mentioned, that's from a higher level of abstraction. There's a narrow interpretation and perhaps not so much inclusiveness in that process. But when you look at the granular level, at the programmatic level, and how these consortia have been laid out, it's actually much more inclusive and self-organizing. So missions are more or less equal to the partnerships that have been laid out. Rushing through time as time is flying, going now at the regional level, we have looked at 3 regions, most predominantly industrial regions that either have explicitly implemented some either missions or have the interest of implementing missions, or more indirectly some transformative approaches in their work. If we start with Västerbotten, this is a premature state at the moment. There are no missions designed at this point, but the region has laid out this smart specialization roadmap for smart economic transformation, where they explicitly laid out their interest in defining local missions, guided by the Partnerships for Regional Innovation Playbook, so the European Commission document, and in a very Matsukato approach, they define that missions should be challenge-based, place-based, inclusive, and strive for a system-level transformation. Again, speaking to the authorities in the regional council, they do not see this as a radical policy shift, but more of a policy evolution from previous efforts. Generally, this is perceived as a positive development or an opportunity in the broader context of the green transition. If you know the region, Västerbotten is quite wealthy in natural resources and renewable energy, and has quite inexpensive land, which is seen as an opportunity for new investments, and particularly in this wave of green industrialization. So there is a large degree of support for this new idea of missions, so far as it's an inclusive process. This has been mentioned in an extensive survey. But also, if you are familiar with the case of the Northvolt mega factory that had experienced this sort of boom and bust situation, also shows the high risks involved in these big investments, not only for the company itself, but also for the regional and the local authorities, which heavily invest in catering for the interests of these companies. So there is a potential negative side that in focusing so much on these large projects, we may be neglecting other important areas. Here, maybe a plus minus. It's not clear cut, but what has been highlighted as an important condition in the region is that stakeholders are well experienced with industrial transformations. It's not the first time that we are undergoing very big transformations, and so that stakeholders are aware that these are big bets and they come with big risks. Moving to Ostrobothnia in Finland, it's similar to national level. We can see that the directionality and mission approaches are not explicit necessarily, but they are embedded in the innovation system. Again, here, as in Sweden, the transformative approaches are seen more as a natural evolution of previous policy. Ostrobothnia is considered in Finland a forerunner in smart specialization strategies and really nourishing the innovation system. And there is a very mature innovation system in the region with intensive collaboration, especially relevant to the energy sector and energy cluster, with a mix of very large, as let's say locomotive firms, but lots of smaller as well, smaller companies. When it comes to the local level, so municipal level, there is an interesting instrument, the ecosystem agreement, which allows the government and city of Vaasa to really stimulate the ecosystem, the innovation ecosystem. Whereas at the regional level, there is a very, very limited mandate and also instruments. So the regional council has been actually active in building capital and bringing new instruments, mainly via different type of EU funds and mechanisms, like from a long time ago, the smart specialization strategy, but more recently seeking to become one of the hydrogen valleys under the new European innovation agenda. So in this sense, the transformative efforts become incorporated into this more consensus-based and stakeholder-driven decision-making process. It's not possible for the region to really push in a direction. So it's really more of a collaborative approach. And this has been described as the most effective way to do it. Oh yeah, it's also interesting to say that in line with one of the academics describing missions or visions, that stakeholders actually have seen missions more as not as a strict goal, but really as more as a common vision. Jumping into Northern Jutland in Denmark, we cannot see that there is new missions per se, but rather it's the appropriation of the national level missions at a subnational level. So you can really see strong effort in a more bottom-up way from local actors to embrace these missions and to make them their own. But this also denotes that these missions fit very well with the regional interests, so to say. So the local actors have described that the definition of the missions, especially focusing on carbon capture utilization and power-to-X technologies, have received substantial input from the regional actors, and the regional specificities have been considered. But the trouble in Denmark, of course, is there is very little institutional capacity. The regional level is nearly non-existent. So it's much more of a collaborative approach. Again, consortia, more informal, more trust-based, but it's quite intense. There's intensive interaction and experimentation amongst a group of people, maybe inclusive, but not substantially inclusive, you could say. Which has been assumed to be a positive thing, because this makes it more place-based and very much looking for the benefits that are locally. But of course, this brings the weakness. There is a clear weakness, because with not having a strong region, there's no mandate, and it's difficult to influence politicians and decision making at the national level. Since time is ending, I will just have some quick conclusions from this bombardment of information I have just given. But just to say that that in these 3 countries that we have worked with, there is a long history of using this challenge-based approach and linking sustainability to innovation policy. Although now it's more explicit and more direct. It's important to note that mission approaches have not replaced pre-existing innovation policy structures and systems, but rather come as an additional tool or as a new layer in already complex policy frameworks. You could also say that from the outset, really, rather formally, you could say that these processes are quite top-down. But that's not the case, and this is the same in all 3 countries. Once you scratch the surface, they are integrated in much more consensus-based policymaking tradition. In all cases, the mission approaches and transformative approaches are placeless. There is no specific or systematic vertical coordination across levels, with, we could say, some exceptions with the programs on carbon neutral cities, perhaps. But of course, all of these missions have very strong place impacts. Generally, at the strategic level, missions have a very narrow interpretation, so not revealing the complexities of it. But at the programmatic level, it's clear that they become much more complex, much more uncertain, and in that sense, missions become more interpreted as visions. At the regional level, we can say that there's quite a difference from region to region, also in terms of the degree of mandate and institutional strength. But we can again see that there is a great degree of reinterpretation. So based on national and supranational policy, there is a great degree of reinterpretation. It's important to note that the local specificities, all the way from economic specialization to capacities to geographical conditions, are very important in defining the possibilities and the challenges for it. Some of these things I already said, so I skip it, but just to conclude, maybe that that in the end, speaking to many of the local stakeholders, support for these missions really boil down to whether there is clear local benefits, and this, I think, it's important to emphasize, because the national level missions, or even in supranational level missions, can perhaps sometimes conflict with the local interest or the local priorities. So I think this is a key issue to address if they are going to be anchored in local interests. I stop here. We have also developed some recommendations, a policy brief and long recommendations. These recommendations are not laying out a pathway for what to do, but is rather things that need to be considered and need to be discussed. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alberto, for this presentation. I can just imagine how hard it must be after working on this topic so extensively in the past months and publishing these reports, to cut it down to just a short presentation. So well done, and thank you very much for that. So we have a little bit of time for questions, and some of them have already been asked in the chat. So I would like to maybe start with the one asked by Anna, about the local level. You mentioned already some examples of regions, missions at the regional level in your presentation, Alberto, but I think the question from Anna was also directed at Charles. So how about examples at the local level? And overall, the most commonly known missions, I think, are at the supranational and national level, but what is the local and situation at the local and regional level?
Yeah, I'm glad I kept it short. Leave some time for questions. I've been going through the questions in the chat, so maybe I can just ping them off kind of quickly. Firstly, the one around the local level, because our work focuses on science, technology, and innovation, it's lesser focused. They do exist, but it's just less something that we focus on. Mostly our work at the city level happens through what Alberto brought up with the EU missions and their work on 100 climate neutral cities. And that's then has work going on across Europe with cities trying to address this. At the same time, many other countries also have missions that directly impact cities, and so then they're often involved in national level missions. Austria and Sweden are two that come to mind. That are doing things around transportation, I think, and mobility. Canada and Japan have ones around construction and smart cities. And because a lot of the implementation instruments, or a lot of the regulatory instruments for some policy domains live in a local level, they're very important. So Japan has all this work going on around autonomous vehicles, and they're working with the cities to test things out. If you don't mind, I might just rattle through some of the other ones too, just because I have some quick answers for some of the other ones. And so systems thinking and value of change and the theory of change. These two things are related, but they're different with missions. The theory of change is a little bit more actionable, whereas systems thinking, I think, is a little bit more around identifying what are the players, who are the players, what are the levers. And a theory of change can then actually be used because you're prioritizing what work you want to do. Sweden, for instance, uses its theory of change to make funding decisions. So Vinnova will do a review of project applications, make sure they're technically sound and they have a business case. And then they use the theory of change to prioritize which ones they want to address. How are missions defined? It really depends on the context. Some people say we want to do missions, then they do all this work to decide on mission areas, workshops, working groups, big data analytics, foresight. And some people say we have problems, how do we address this? And then they come to the idea of missions a little bit more naturally. And then the last one that I noted, and I see maybe a couple more popped up, was MOIPs versus S3s. Some S3s have missions in them, but I shared a report that actually does some really interesting deep analysis that I'd welcome you to read if you're interested more about these. And I think one of the big things is that S3s focus more on economic competitiveness, where a mission-oriented approach is maybe a little bit more about having like broader societal outcomes and addressing broader societal challenges, but still taking a systemic approach, still working across government with a big inclusive approach to define those priorities. Thank you.
Yes, and I think, Alberto, you have also shown some examples of how the S3 and mission are brought together in the Nordic countries already. So you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect on one thing, because of course, the way the approach has been conceptualized, it's within innovation, right? So if we think of innovation instruments and how formal innovation system is designed, that's one thing. But a lot of the times, once it goes to the discussion of stakeholders, then this waters down and the interpretation changes a lot. So local missions can often not be much about really innovation, at least in scientific innovation, but more about the normal priorities, the goals that you will already find in any other kind of strategy. So I think this also denotes the difficulty of having this comprehensive approach, because the more you dig into the complexities of issues, we go into practicalities. So yeah, I don't have many examples right now to describe, but just by discussing with stakeholders, this becomes quite recurrent, that we kind of forget the details, or that we just focus on technicalities or just on social. It is really complicated to work with these things together.
Okay, thanks a lot. Those who asked questions in the chat, I have they all been answered by Charles in his rattling through. That was very impressive, by the way, Charles, how you went through these questions very quickly, but also very profoundly. Does anyone want to follow up or feel that their question has not been answered?
Can I tackle one last one very quickly? I see
Sure.
about so with overarching missions versus challenge-driven programs. Challenges are often technology focused, and they might focus on one specific issue at a time. Some challenge-oriented programs do border than missions. So the border isn't always crystal clear. Research Ireland does a really interesting thing where they'll run a series of challenges around the same topic. So now you have a bit of a portfolio of things. And then they also then team up with other people from across government to then offer follow-on support for these things to help scale up the solutions that happen. And then the last interesting thing is that they require all of the people on the challenge teams to have something that they call a societal impact champion, who has to think about what's the use case, who are the users, what's going to happen with these technologies when they get off the ground. And so they are connected, but the missions are usually involve a broader set of levers than just the challenge prize, and sometimes they can blur.
All right. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. Maybe we can allow one more question if there's one. We have one in the chat. I think, Luke, that's you.
Yeah, hi. Just a quickie, if I could, or sorry, is it Charles? Was there something else? Oh, Alberto, sorry, had someone speak. Yeah, I was just curious about any examples you might share. Oh, thank you for the great presentations, by the way. Thank you. But I was just interested in how MOIPs have been used, if at all, to elevate the voices and agency of more disadvantaged or marginalized groups.
Yeah, so I was going to put this in the chat. So I think the one that comes to mind is with Canada's National Research Council challenge programs. This is a way that its National Research Council has provided more of what we call thematic-based missions. So this is a way of coordinating research within an organization towards societal challenges. But again, with the portfolio approach, engaging with other instruments outside of just the Research Council, and they have one that's focused on northern communities, and they've embedded Indigenous people at each stage of the process, identifying the challenges, identifying the solutions. They require all the programs, like the individual projects that they support within that, to include in Indigenous business or Indigenous community. And so that's one that definitely comes to mind. And then some of these other ones in Canada will require Indigenous people as a bonus, or they provide bonuses if you have Indigenous people. My cat also wants to get involved in this conversation, but that's one that I would recommend you look at.
Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. The cat made you disappear for a second. All right, so unfortunately, yeah, we have reached the end of the time. I have one quick closing question to you with I'm asking you for a short answer. As Sabine has presented in the beginning, our partners are now setting out to design some prototype missions at the regional level in connection to these clusters of social ecological innovation. So working with the social innovation and social entrepreneurship ecosystem at the regional level. What would be your one piece of advice when these actors start on the process, on the journey towards defining a mission? One thing from your research, from your insights, one thing what they should consider or keep in mind when starting this process. Alberto, Charles, who wants to go first?
Yeah, sure. Well, looking from the evidence, really, I mean, what is interesting is that what the system looks from the outset is not necessarily what works in practice. So there's actually much more capacity for engagement and more distributed type of leadership in practice. I mean, in the very weak case of institutionalized local leadership in Denmark, for example, there is such a incredible coordination at the actor level. So stronger coordination can lead to very good things, and I'm borrowing from instruments that can be found at EU level, for example, so not only from national level. Yeah, it's possible.
So encouraging words from you. Thank you, Alberto. Charles?
Maybe I'll say not everything needs to be a mission, and that's okay too. So if what you're trying to do is encourage social innovation and encourage that sort of engagement in your communities, that's great. But it doesn't always need to be a mission. And so I think I just take a step back and think, is this something that is a systemic problem that requires this additional layer of governance and work and effort and requires these tools from across government? Because one thing that we didn't talk about, but when we're looking at missions, it's not just about, are you tackling your challenge, but are you tackling your challenge better than a traditional way of doing public policy? And so we call this the double additionality of missions, because they do require more effort, they do require more work. And so if you're going to get into a mission-oriented approach, then I think I just take a step back and think, is this better than doing it in a traditional way? And if it is, that's great. But I think that's the first thing to think about.
Okay, so the advice is not to do missions just for the sake of doing a mission, but rather reflecting and seeing if it is the right way to do the right policy approach for this specific circumstance. So it was quite a ride through MOIP, through mission-oriented innovation policy, in only just a little bit more than an hour. Thank you again very much, Alberto and Charles, for your presentations and for answering all these questions so eloquently and quickly at the end of this webinar. This was really helpful and insightful, I think, for the Resist Partnership and for hopefully everyone else who joined today as well. Before we close the webinar, I hand back the word one more time to you, Sabine, to let us know how we can stay in touch.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the very interesting topics. And yeah, I just want to, I posted it already in the chat, our as you can connect with us via our homepage, LinkedIn, we have a YouTube channel, and yeah, we're very happy to stay in contact with you and yeah, talk about missions or anything else around social innovation and social transformation. And thank you for the moderation, Hauke.
My pleasure. Thank you all. Have a great sunny day, and hope to see you soon again in the webinar format or elsewhere. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Ciao.
Basically, what I would be presenting here is a little bit of a step back. We wanted to